You're listening to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast.
You place a finger in the hole and wiggle it about.
Hi there, and welcome to the show. Today we are doing something special. SpaceVenture is out on early access on Steam right now, and it comes with a brand new soundtrack from a composer who shaped an entire era of Sierra music. And that's Ken Allen. If you grew up with Space Quest or Jones in the Fast Lane, or heck, even Mixed Up Mother Goose, or maybe that Sierra logo fanfare that's burned into all of our memories, you already know Ken's work. SpaceVenture gave him room to build a whole new musical world filled with humor, sci-fi weirdness, character themes, and, well, some of the most creative cues he's written since the Oakhurst days. So we're going to play some samples and talk through how the soundtrack came together, dig into the history of the craft and the legacy behind it. So, Ken, welcome to the show.
I'm really thrilled to be here.
Thank you. You've been part of the sound of Sierra for decades, and now you're back with a full new album for SpaceVenture. So how did that sort of happen? And that's kind of what I want to unwrap. But, before we get there, can I just take a minute to say thank you for being the music of my childhood?
Oh my goodness.
You can see the logo, you can hear the music, the Space Quest games. Space Quest 4 is my favorite. It is, I listen to the soundtracks all the time. I can't say that to very many people.
Well, I'm very grateful for your thanks. To quote my dear friend Josh Mandel, if we would have known that people would have enjoyed our games and our music 35 years later, we would have made them good. We were at the very beginning of the sound card era at Sierra. Sierra was always at the cutting edge of new technology, and we were the ones who were able to lead the way. And I just had so much fun. I mean, I'm trained as a composer, and I was able to get all of my ambition for composing out and into the world while working at Sierra.
Brilliant. Even my son knows the last two notes in the fanfare. Like, he can't, it's not even he knows it, it's that he can't listen to it without he himself vocalizing the last little two notes there. Nah, nah.
Well, I do have a little story behind that. We were doing something that no other company was doing. We were using MIDI to control on-screen animation, because every computer back in those days was a different speed, and so everything played animation at a different speed. And in order to make sound and animation sync up, we dedicated a track in the MIDI world to controlling on-screen animation and some other things. And so all I'd have to do is just, I think it was controller 127, and send it a command. And the system that Sierra used to make their games, the SCI system, would recognize that and know that it was linked to a particular piece of animation. And that's why it always syncs up when you hear the ding ding at the end.
Ooh.
Super cool. Yeah. Wow. That explains a lot too. Because now that you're saying, I'm like, yeah, sometimes the fanfare would play dramatically slow or like in a hurry. I don't know what I thought when I would hear that. I'd just be like, oh, they're really excited to get this game started on this one. That's why it's playing quicker, I guess. Okay, so I kind of have some musician-y questions for you, and I'm just going to try and sprinkle them as we go, because I do want to get us into SpaceVenture and go through some of these clips that Anna and I have been listening to all week. But just to get a sense from you as a musician, I'm curious, when you begin to write song scores, do you start from a place of like melody and harmony and texture, or do you begin more with like the mood and feeling?
Kind of all of the above. It depends on what we're trying to achieve in a particular scene. Obviously, we want the music to match the psychological feeling that we want to invoke in the player. And that's true for motion picture as well. You want to draw out a certain emotion and play some familiar kind of instruments that go good together to make that emotion come to be as an audience member. Sometimes it is looking for the psychological feeling. Sometimes it is matching what's on screen. Sometimes it is starting with a melody. In fact, I usually start with a chord progression. And okay. I'll put a chord progression together on the piano, and I'll figure out what kind of melody goes with that. And I try to be unconventional in my chord progression so that everything is musically interesting. So it just depends. I have the curse, and Mark Siebert does too. We were trading stories at the Portland Retro Gamers Expo, that when we're out doing something else, like he's out playing golf and I'm out in the garden or something, we're both hearing music in our head, and we run inside and we write down, the melody and what we're thinking about, so that we can, use it later. So it's good to know that one of my dear friends has the same curse that I do.
Well, we're all thankful for that curse. So did you get a job at Sierra because you were into music or because you were into video games? Like, walk me through kind of the week surrounding when you started. Let's go back to 1989 for a minute.
Oh, well, okay. Let's get my DeLorean here.
Thank you.
As a hobbyist, I had learned computer programming on the Atari 400, big powerhouse of its day. And there was also a MIDI interface for the Atari. And so I was learning MIDI and creating games in BASIC, both of which were painful back in those days. I had created some music for some games I had made, and it was kind of fun. And because I'm trained in music as a composer, I was using the Atari 400 to get my composer vibes on. At the same time, I was involved in local theater and in some churches and some other groups, putting together music, performing with synthesizer and MIDI controllers like the Atari 400. And so I was already well-versed in creating music the way that Sierra needed it created. Mm-hmm. And then one day, someone brought my attention to an ad that was in the paper about Mark Siebert had the same ad when he joined. Wanted musicians for creating games. And I thought, well, there's no way that's a full-time job, because if it was, I'd be already hired there. I put together a demo cassette tape and put a resume together, and I even created a song just for the demo tape that I put together, so they could see how quickly I could compose music. Mm-hmm. Sent it up there, and I got a call like 10 days later, and I thought, okay, is this going to be a full-time job, or is it going to be contract, or is it a couple hours a week? What's it going to be? So I drove up to Oakhurst, and boy, it was a sleepy little town with only a stop sign in the middle of town, and now it's huge. But I found the Sierra building, which is the metal building that they had when they had the shutdown last century. I went in and I interviewed with Mark and with Stuart Goldstein, and also with a couple other people, and thought, okay, well, that was fun, but I doubt I'm going to get hired. And then I got a job offer like 7 days later. And so in April of 1989, I started at Sierra. We were all cooped up, me and Mark and Stuart, and then another musician, Rob Adisalt, was hired. And we were, all four of us were in a room about the size of a bedroom creating music. And we quickly outgrew that, and eventually we ended up with our own offices on the second floor. But the first thing I did was The Colonel's Bequest. All I knew was it was a murder mystery type game. And so I started studying, film noir type music, put together a little theme that I had Roberta Williams listen to. And as she was listening to it, she kind of scrunched her nose. And I went, uh-oh, I'm going to get fired on my very first game. And she said, well, this takes place in the 1920s, right? And I said, oh, well, problem solved. So I spent the next week down at the music library at Fresno State University and listened to everything I could find that was popular during the 1920s. And I figured out the style of music that was needed for that era, created a theme song, and when Roberta came back in the second time, she went, perfect, all right, you're on. So that's how I got my first assignment.
Love that. What style of music do you tend to default to, just on a personal level? Do you have a certain, I don't know, like personally, I for some reason I tend to, if I'm not watching myself, everything I write will turn into a heist kind of vibe. Not sure why, but I'm wondering if you have the same thing where a certain style or two is just, I don't know, you have a proclivity towards.
Well, I'll take you back to when I was very, very young. My mother and I were movie-going buddies. That was the thing we did together. And she took me to go see the movie Patton, which starred George C. Scott, and it was about the World War II general. The music was by Jerry Goldsmith. I couldn't tell you what the movie was about after we came out of it, but I remember hearing in my head that soundtrack and thinking, I want to do that. I want to do what Jerry Goldsmith does. Right. And so the very first time I bought an album with my own money, I bought the soundtrack to Patton, and I still have it today. many years later, I got a chance to meet Jerry Goldsmith, and he autographed it for me.
Oh, cool.
So I tend to write in the style of Jerry Goldsmith. And you wouldn't think he has a style, but he's got a very robust orchestral, but then he also has a lot of experimental music, like in Planet of the Apes. He uses a lot of synthesizer and electronic sounds in that soundtrack. So I tend to gravitate towards full orchestra, boisterous, not exactly John Williams kind of composer, more like Jerry Goldsmith. So that's my default.
As just like a fan of movie soundtracks and composed music and things like that myself, I'm just curious what. And it could be a short answer, but could you give me like your top three or like your just a few favorite movie scores?
Oh well, Patton of course is one of them. Back to the Future. I'm a huge Alan Silvestri fan, and that score just blows me away. He also composed the music for the Marvel universe that we all enjoy. I am a big fan of the Star Wars music, so those are probably my top three.
Cool.
Is Patton, Star Wars, and Back to the Future.
Beautiful. Okay.
Hey, since we're asking questions about soundtracks, is there any, like when you think back of the soundtracks that you worked on when you were at Sierra, is there any in particular that come back to you or gives you a jolt of nostalgia when you hear it today?
Boy, I tell you, every time I hear anything from that period of my career, I think back to how much fun we were having. Something that I did that I don't think very many people know. If you played Castle of Dr. Brain and you hear that rockin' title theme, that's actually Rhapsody in Blue, but modernized into rock style music. So next time you listen to it, and if you're familiar with Rhapsody in Blue, just familiarize yourself with the sequence and the melody.
Cool.
The favorite project I worked on, my favorite project was when you mentioned Anna, and that was Space Quest 4. It was so much fun to create that score. I created that opening scene in a weekend. The two guys came to me on a Friday and said, "Hey, we have a quarterly review with the board of directors." They something Sierra did is they would review all the games in progress, I think quarterly, if my memory serves. And they came to me and said, "And we have animation, but we don't have any sound or we don't have any music. Would you be willing to help us out in a pinch?" We got a video camera, put in the videotape, and we put it in front of the screen and played the opening sequence. I took it home, borrowed the company's tape player, a videotape player, and I composed the music to that sequence in the opening of Space Quest 4. And I think I brought the MT-32 to its knees because I maxed out every possible combination of instruments and number of notes being played at once. I brought the music in on Sunday, and Scott Murphy was there working on getting everything ready for the meeting on the following Tuesday, and he plugged it in and he said, "Yeah, this is really good. Can you do this so that it syncs up with this particular kind of animation?" I said, "Sure, we'll do that." So I went home, synced it up with that animation. I brought it in on a Monday. I handed Scott the floppy disk that had all the MIDI information on it, and he loaded it up in the game, and he did a couple little things with code, booted up the game, had the music or had the sound on the speakers, as loud as he. Well, it was pretty loud because it could be heard by the entire department. And the music started, and after we finished, it goes all the way to the point where Roger Wilco is sucked into a time vortex. When it got to that part of the music and it was all done, there was applause in the art department, and I thought, well, not the art department. We were in pods by that time, but the whole group in the immediate area around where Scott's desk was applause, and as it was playing, I could see both Scott and Mark smiling, like, "Yeah, this is what we need." Yeah. And then I heard somebody again. So Scott booted up the game again and played the sequence, and everybody was. It was like, if you work in an office with cubicles, it's the Prairie Farm effect where heads come up above the separator. It was that, and after the second time through and more applause, I thought, okay, this is going to be a fun game to work on.
Oh, cool.
So that's my most fond memory of working on music for Sierra.
Well, that game it's my number one in after King's Quest IV. Space Quest IV is my main favorite game. I even have a still sealed big box of Space Quest IV in my collection with the original price tag of $69 Canadian.
And $1991. Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's hard to keep things sealed in this day and age. I'm not even sure if I want to, but this game is so special. For fear of disturbing it, I just want to leave it as it is.
When I did the score for my game, I used Space Quest 4 as like a study guide, I guess you could say. It was like it was the definitive standout choice for me as far as what to study. When it came to the pacing, like I was really curious how you and any, I guess, adventure game composer would go about things like not exhausting the player, but also keeping it interesting at the same time, and things like that. So I remember just having Space Quest 4 soundtrack on for a long time, like a month or two before it was time for me to actually produce the music. I was just trying to bake it in there, I guess you could say. But yeah, it's almost like the bar, I guess, for me for adventure game soundtracks. Okay, I have a question about your journey into Ringworld 2. Because from what I understand, you were like the co-writer and designer on this game? Like you leapt from composer to game designer, I think.
There were a few of us who were at Sierra who wanted to strike out on our own and see if we could recreate the magic. And my turn came to bat, and they said, well, we want you to make a sequel to our Ringworld game, which is based on the science fiction novels by Larry Niven of the same title. And after reading all of the novels that were in that series, I came up with a story. I came up with a bunch of puzzles that we could come up with. So I was the game designer. Then I also had to write everything. So I was the writer. And then when it came time to record all the voices, I was the director of the voices and also the composer and the sound designer. So I wore 5 or 6 hats on that project, and I don't think I remember getting any sleep either. But I wanted that game to be, because Ringworld is a manufactured place. I wanted the music to sound manufactured, so I gravitated towards like the Wendy Carlos sound for that soundtrack. And there are a few pieces in that game that do use traditional instruments, but I try to keep it very synthetic using that sound that she made popular. So that drew on every bit of talent and experimentation that I had at my disposal, and it was very exhausting.
Had you'd been pretty keen to design a game? Was that something, or something that allured you towards Tsunami, or just something that you wanted to do? Was like tell a certain story, or just try your hand at designing? I'm just kind of curious what led for you to take the leap into game design.
I just wanted to try my hand at it, and one of the conditions that I had for coming on board over at Tsunami was, hey, at some point while I'm here, I'd like to be able to design a game. And they said, okay, yeah, we'll do that. And then when it came my turn, I said, okay, well, how do I do this? And so Bob Heitman was my manager at the time. He is also a former Sierra alum. And he said, well, create a story, create puzzles, make a list. We'll go over it. We'll help you. And fortunately, the team was very generous in working with me, a novice game designer. And they all pitched in with their own little bits. It's a bit like the story that Al Lowe likes to tell about how King's Quest games are made. It's a story of stone soup. And the story goes something like this. A person comes into a village, and he's going to make some soup, but he only has stones and water and a fire. So he says, well, I'm going to make soup here, and I've got stones. And so as the villagers got curious, and why is he going to be making soup out of stone? Then someone would come along and say, hey, some vegetables might be good to put into this soup. And so the person would bring the vegetables and put them in, and then someone would say, well, maybe some lamb for protein would be a nice addition to the soup. And so that person would bring their contribution. And then someone would bring a third ingredient and a fourth ingredient until the whole community was participating in making this soup. and the person who started it only had a stone and a bucket of water. And a lot of times that's how game design comes together. Everybody on the team says, oh, hey, we could do this and we could do that. And I go, yeah, great idea. And that was something that I really appreciated about working with Sierra and also at Tsunami, that people check their egos at the door. They didn't feel like they had to have all the best answers. They would take a great idea if you suggested it, and they would put it in, and you could count yourself as having contributed to a great piece of art.
Mm-hmm. I like the Stone Soup story. There might even be some an addendum to the ending where, like, just during beta testing, somebody might say, you know what, let's take the stone out, actually.
Oh, yeah, there's that.
It's not a good stone.
I just as a fan, I really love your work on the Blue Force soundtrack. It's so good. It's so good. In hindsight, if I was more aware of that might have been the soundtrack that I used to study, because it's really dynamic and interesting, and Northwind Take Me Home is just a great song. Like, it's so good. The bass is so nasty. I was listening to it this morning, just getting happy. Just makes me happy. I absolutely love your work on that. So I guess that's not a question, just a good job and thank you.
Well, that particular song was, it was modeled after a popular artist at the time, and I can't remember the name. He was known for piano stuff like what you hear in that song.
Yeah.
I'll think of it hopefully before this podcast is over. But I wanted to write a song in that style. And this gave me a chance to break out of my orchestra preference mode, because in a police story, you want to have, modern music and instruments. So I completely switched from orchestra, Jerry Goldsmith, to doing something that you'd find on TV during that era. Mm. And Jim Walls was a designer who made the Police Quest series. And I don't know if many people know this, but Jim Walls was also the designer on the game based on Blade Runner for Westwood Studios. And he was just a delight to work with. He would say, yeah, this scene is this, and it's kind of a love story, and so I'd write something. It was, yeah, that's perfect. And so that gave me a chance to stretch my legs a bit in the composition world.
I should say, too, to our listeners, you should jump on wherever you get your music and check out the Tsunami collection of Ken's. I'm trying to think. I guess it's the definitive digital soundtrack collection. But just search, Ken Allen, Tsunami, and it's got all your Tsunami works on it, and it's a lot of fun to go through and listen to.
Yeah, it's on iTunes and Google Music, and I think even on Amazon Music and a few other places. One of my favorite pieces on that album, that collection, is the medley of music from Wacky Funsters. It's got 5 or 6, maybe even more than that, different pieces of music that was in the game, and all strung together in a medley, and it spans styles more than any other game I've worked on, all the way from rock and roll, riding down the highway, to a crazy little cartoon style ditty at the end of it. That's one of my favorite pieces of work while at Tsunami was the soundtrack to Wacky Funsters.
Okay, I'll have to check that one out too. My favorite movie soundtrack, musical, is Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and it spans so many different types
Indeed.
of music all over the world. It really does, and there's no other musical that does it quite like that one does. And I know Andrew Lloyd Webber wrote it in college, and you're not going to get anything like that.
I actually
again,
agree with that. That is my favorite Andrew Lloyd Webber composition work, and only the second one after that is Jesus Christ Superstar. Both of those. Everything else I don't care about, but those two are just amazing pieces of work.
He was young and full of energy. You can't replicate that. Once he got more into classical and it got technical in a completely different direction, but had to start somewhere. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the tracks that you've shared. We're just going to talk about them here, but through the magic of radio, we will be patching in the tracks that we're talking about after, so everybody listening can kind of listen along and hear. But I'm curious about the first track, Walking Around. You said you wrote that before you even knew anything about the game. So kind of what was your mental picture?
This requires a little bit of going back in time with the DeLorean again. I had stopped composing for games in the mid-'90s, and I had always done it using MIDI. You know, you had the sound cards, you had the MT32, and then you had the sound canvas and the general MIDI boxes. And so that's where my knowledge of composing for games stopped. When it came time to propose working on SpaceVenture, I had to learn all the new technology, the VSTs, the digital audio workstations, the different kinds of libraries that were available. And it was a learning curve. I mean, imagine if you're an artist and back in the 90s you used DPaint to create all the art, and then suddenly you have to learn Photoshop overnight. Mm-hmm. It was a very steep learning curve. And so I wrote that piece of music to get myself up to speed on where the technology was in 2012, I think, is when they announced. It was a little expensive, not as expensive as buying all new MIDI gear, but I had to buy some libraries and set up a workstation using Cubase. So I put that together, and all I knew was that in adventure games, when your character is walking around and exploring, they need some music to go along with that. And all I knew was that there was going to be a character named Ace Hardway. He was going to be walking around at some point. So I put this together. And I modeled it after the theme song to that comedy show called Mad About You, where the song just kind of does nothing. It just kind of goes in a circle, mm-hmm. and it plays and it plays, and it kind of just does nothing. And so I wrote this piece of music. I sent it over to the guys from Andromeda group and say, hey, I'd like to let me work on your game, because I mean, you know, we worked together all those years ago, and I'd love to get the band back together, as it were. And so they listened to it, and they said, well, that won't fit, but sure, yeah, if you want to help us out, we'll listen to what you've got to do. So that was written just not knowing anything. I picked a style that would be kind of generic. If I may take this moment to plug, if you go to kenallenmusic.com, you'll be able to listen to selected tracks from the SpaceVenture game, and Just Walking Around is one of those that you'll be able to listen to, and you'll hear the very first thing I wrote for the guys from Andromeda for SpaceVenture.
So what's this about lyrics and potentially a music video? What direction are you imagining there?
As I was putting this album together and digging out all these old tunes that I'd written a while ago, I thought this song might actually do pretty well with lyrics. And then I started thinking about what kind of lyrics, and Just Walking Around is kind of a philosophy. Everybody in the world is just walking around. They're traveling through life. They're going from one destination to another, but they're always in progress, just walking around. And so the lyrics that I've written for this, and they'll be in the album, take the idea of walking around as a philosophy for life, that you're enjoying the journey, not just the destination. And everybody's just walking around.
Brilliant. Everybody listen to, you can check out the description for the podcast notes in your app, and there'll be a link to Ken's website there.
Yeah, you got to get there. So also, all right, well, I'm listening to the view from the dome, and I need to know, were you drawing on any particular sci-fi influences? Was that like, Blade Runner?
I was a big fan of synth soundtracks in addition to Jerry Goldsmith. I loved Tangerine Dream, and I also loved Wendy Carlos and her work for Clockwork Orange and for Tron. And I wanted something that was ethereal, very futuristic, but kind of retro-futuristic. And so I wrote this piece kind of in tribute to the artists that I mentioned, emulating their style. I was also a big fan of Tomita, I think that's the artist's name. He did a lot of synth work with classical pieces, and so I took what I had learned from listening to their styles and crafted this piece. It's just kind of a musical sound bed with no rhythm, with no melody. There's a little bit of recognizable melodies here and there, but it's largely just you could actually fall asleep to it if you wanted to, and hopefully if you're playing the game you won't fall asleep.
Curious, what are your thoughts on Vangelis and John Carpenter?
Oh, well, yeah, Vangelis is another one. I just adore his work for Chariots of Fire, which is just amazing, an eye-opening experience. I'm not a fan of John Carpenter, although I have heard his music. it's not something that I aspire to emulate.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, Vangelis was part of the inspiration for the musical styles in Ringworld 2.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because, yeah, when you go from there into Solar System Suburbia, you're saying, like, that one's more like 50s, 60s modern marvels music.
That was actually Mark Crow's suggestion. He sent me a track to modern marvels from the 60s. Here's what the future looks like. And it's very upbeat and uses a lot of pizzicato and all that. And then lush strings halfway through. And I thought, I can do that. And so I put together this thing that sounds like futuristic marvels from the 60s. And it fits perfectly because you're in an area of the game where all of the homes look alike. They're all cookie cutter shaped domes, and it's the future because they're quickly manufactured and they're cheap. And so I wanted that feeling. I wanted the player to experience that feeling as they were flying through that part of the game.
Little boxes made of ticky-tacky.
It's the future.
Oh, that's great. Now, when I was listening to Scraps the Tinkerer, it was so familiar. It was just on the edge of my periphery. It has such a distinct personality, though.
Well, I knew he was a crusty old tinkerer and an engineer, and that's all I knew. I didn't know how he interacted with Ace, but I thought, I'm gonna do something that kind of sounds like George Gershwin. I thought, and I don't know why I picked George Gershwin, but as you're listening to the music, you hear the clarinet play, and it's like, oh, that's George Gershwin. I'm a huge fan of George Gershwin. In fact, I remember the first time I heard Gershwin. My mother belonged to the Columbia Records Club, where you got a record a month, and if you committed to a year of buying records, you also got a record rack for your vinyl records. And
Nice.
one of the titles that she ordered from the catalog was the George Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue on side A and American in Paris on side B with the Warner Brothers Orchestra. And I heard that record and I was smitten. I fell in love with George Gershwin immediately. And so that's why Rhapsody in Blue is kind of the hidden song at the beginning of Castle Dr. Brain. But I just love that style. And there's a song in Colonel's Bequest that's also inspired by George Gershwin called I'd Love to Be in Love with You. But I don't think that title is the name of that song is anywhere to be found in the game. I steal from George Gershwin every chance I get.
Actually, you know what? The Peter and the Wolf kind of one to me would be Meet Milo, if I jumped to that one with the horns.
I will tell you the inspiration for that, and I'll fess up to this. The Incredibles. I'll just tell you right off the top, at the beginning. I love that soundtrack. I love the composer for that night. There's a couple of scenes where Mr. Incredible is uncovering the plot, and if you've seen Incredibles, you know what I'm talking about. Well, that scene, I thought I need to do something that builds. It starts off mysterious and gets more epic, gets more ominous until the very end, until you've revealed what's really going on. And so when they were introducing Milo in the game, he starts off as looking like a curve of the moon, and then as the camera pulls back, you see it's the baby in the bubble that you see from 2001: A Space Odyssey. But then he's also addressing his board of directors, and he's getting more and more passionate about his project, which is, if you haven't played the game, I encourage you to play the early access version. But Milo is the head of Centauri Incorporated, which is making a game console called Facebox, which hugs your face like the alien from the original Alien film. And as he's talking about how epic that game console is, the music builds up more and more and more until it's like a huge conclusion. It's like, this is the greatest thing ever. That's where the inspiration for that sequence in the game come from.
Well, if we take a minute to listen to the Nerbs Bar Interstellar Blues, which I absolutely love. this is built around steel guitar sample packs and organized by key and tempo. Like, how did that shape the whole composition? And how the heck did you make authentic steel guitar work in a sci-fi setting?
I don't think I've ever heard anyone use steel guitar in any synth music in any game, and I wanted to be the first. But there's no library of instruments that you can buy that reliably mimic the steel guitar. And so as I expanded my search for what I could do, is I came across a collection of steel guitar sequences that I could buy the license for and put them in the game. And I listened, and the CD was organized in folders by tempo and key. And as I listened to all the samples in all the different folders, I knew that I wanted a tempo of about 90 or 100 beats per second. Once I found the steel guitar sequences that matched that, then I wrote the song around those samples. So it started with somebody else's work first, and then I created the song to support it after that. I wanted the steel guitar sounds to be familiar, but I wanted every other instrument in that band to be unfamiliar. So you have a very odd sounding bass guitar, you have the steel drums playing a melody in the background, and then there's a few other instruments that are in there that you wouldn't hear in a normal country and western band. After I got that finished, Chris Pope said, "Hey, can you make a bunch of those songs?" And I said, "Well, there are other parts of the game that need more music, and if I have more time at the end, then yeah, we can talk about it. But wouldn't it be funnier if that was the only song that played from the jukebox in Nerb's bar and nobody cared, and you could hear the music, it played all the time, people just didn't care if that jukebox only played." They're all intoxicated in varying degrees, and so that it's kind of an inside joke that jukebox in the bar only plays one song and nobody cares, or maybe even nobody notices. So that's a little peek behind the scenes behind the thinking of what went into that piece.
That's great. And I mean, all the instruments are made from junk anyways, so it makes sense that they'd all have like that sound that isn't quite what you would think it would be, but you can feel that they're going there. I really like how it all came together. That is such a good track. It was a lot of fun to work on.
And it was the hardest one. And after having approached writing the music for that piece in the way that I did, starting with the steel guitar samples first, it was pretty involved, and I wasn't sure I wanted to make a whole series of jukebox tunes based around that. It was a pretty hard thing to do. So fortunately they were happy with just one tune in that scene.
The jukebox that just plays the one
Exactly.
song is such a Space Questy thing too, isn't it? Well, let's have a listen for a minute here to Nostro Dumos.
Well, so this is kind of taken inspiration from the first Alien movie. The ship that the crew is piloting is called the Nostrodomo. And so the two guys from Andromeda, with their typical humor, wanted that to look like the word dumbass. So Nostra dumbass, but it's not pronounced dumbass. It's pronounced Nostrodumos.
Like Euland's Flats or something, yes.
And so they did want the feel of the opening piece to the Alien movie. And so there's a hat tip in there with the trumpets, or with the solo trumpet, that is reminiscent of Jerry Goldsmith's soundtrack for Alien. And so that's when as you first boot up the game, your ship is coming into dock at the Nostrodumos, and you hear that music as kind of the establishing shot.
I love the big drums. That's great. How do you balance drama with the two guys' trademark humor when you're doing music? How do you reflect both of those?
Well, I approached writing music for Space Quest and for SpaceVenture and for anything that the two guys would do with going over the top. It's got to be like over the top, orchestral, and it's not really intended to be humorous. In fact, what it does is what the two guys have been known for more than anything else, and that is cultural references. You'll see things from sci-fi movies or sci-fi TV shows or references to those kinds of things in their games. And so this music is intended to do the exactly same thing. It's supposed to remind you of something in the cultural zeitgeist that you would hear musically and go, oh, that kind of sounds like this and this kind of sounds like that. And it's just, it's basically emulating what the guys from Andromeda do, but we're doing it with music.
Oh, that's cool. Would you say with Space Quest and SpaceVenture that you're scoring almost more to the environment?
Well, yes. When it's a typical scene where you're trying to solve a puzzle or you're trying to escape, I would normally write the orchestral score. But if it's something that I want you to feel like this is futuristic, that's when you'll hear the music, the view from the dome. It just depends on what we want to try to accomplish psychologically with the scene. So if it's a traditional drama, then it's the orchestra. But if it's something that we want to invoke a different kind of emotion, like, oh, this is the future, or oh, this is the past, this is country music, then I'll write to that particular sensibility.
Right. And do you have any, I'm not sure if this is a question that could be even explained well, but do you have any go-to tricks or things that you like to do, maybe certain types of instruments or I don't want to get too deep in the woods with scales and stuff, but just any fun little tricks that you employ when a scene needs to be like playful or suspenseful, like just things that help you immediately fall into that feeling.
Yeah, I have a bag of tricks for that purpose. When something is playful, you'll hear pizzicato strings. There's a song that doesn't play in the game, but is going to be included in the album, and it's the song that was intended to play as you're repairing Rooter, the Wonder Dog. He gets damaged in the first act of the game, and part of the second act is you putting him back together and repairing him. And I ended up using kind of a snooping around, lighthearted suspense music. I originally had a piece that was very heartrending and like I need to fix my best buddy kind of a feeling, and I ended up going with the comical piece instead because that kind of fit the whole theme of the game and of that scene. If you get the album, you'll be able to hear what was originally intended. How that piece of music came together was Mark Croak said, "Hey, have you seen Silent Running, that old sci-fi movie?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I remember that." He says, "Would you mind listening to the soundtrack of that?" And I think that might be Jerry Goldsmith too. I'm not sure. He wanted me to find the piece of music that the main character, that accompanies the main character as he's repairing one of his robots. And I heard that and I go, yeah, I could emulate that. And so then when we put it in the game, it didn't quite fit, but we still had the piece of music, and now it's going to be available to anybody who buys the game. But there are other things that I do, like for full epic, I've got all the orchestra doing everything that they can do. Like I said, lighthearted, I'll draw on novelty combinations of instruments like the clarinet and the bassoon playing together, or the piccolo and the tuba playing together, to give a lighthearted feel. I also use different kinds of scale modes in evoking emotion. So if you're familiar with modes in music, you got your Dorian mode, your Lydian mode, your Mixolydian mode, and a few others. When I want a scene to feel like pensive and you're not quite sure what's going to be happening, I'll use the Dorian mode, and you can Google that and find out what I mean by that offline. But it takes the scale and alters a couple of notes in the scale to get this pensive feeling, this little bit of tension. For a hopeful kind of a feeling, like you would have in repairing Rooter, I would use the Lydian mode because it's got the way that the scale's put together plays naturally with like, oh, hey, this is going to be cool kind of thing. And then for scenes where I want to give a sense of soothing, like, oh, this is going to be good. This is going to be, everything's going to be better. I'll break out the Mixolydian mode, which again is just the scale with a couple of altered notes in it. And everything will be written with that altered scale in mind. And so those are just a couple of bags of tricks, a couple of things in my bag of tricks that I use when it comes to approaching writing music and trying to evoke certain kinds of emotional response.
Because sometimes you're just not going on very much at all. Like some of the information you're telling me you're getting before you write it, it's you really have to use your imagination a lot too, I suppose.
I try to put myself in the shoes of the person who's playing the game, and what would make this particular activity in the game more fulfilling. How can I make it more fulfilling from an audio experience?
Because it's tricky. It's like, because you have to be there, but you don't want to be so much there that the music's overwhelming the game itself. I've always thought of that being just such a tricky point to find, and you find it so well.
Yeah, that is one of the things you have to keep in mind as you're writing music for a game, is that the player could spend endless hours in this particular mode of the game as they try to solve puzzles, and you have to write a loop of music that is long enough and is not. It's long enough to be looped and still feel like it belongs, but not boring. So that it's, oh God, I got to keep hearing this piece of music over and over again. So I really work hard to find just the right mix of the arrangement and instruments playing, so that it's still interesting as you hear it an hour later in the same scene. And that's pretty hard.
It's very unusual for the video game music. You're not getting that. You're not getting it in movies. You're not getting it in anywhere else where you listen and you have to think. And I think that's why this music is so strong for us as gamers emotionally, because of just the setting and the situation we would listen to the music in. It's very, embedded.
One of the first things that I did over at Sierra was we had licensed some games from Japan, and one of them was called Thexter. We were tasked with taking that music, which is very much a Japanese arcade game style, and Americanizing it. And I noticed that they weren't living up to the rules that I set for myself. The music was kind of monotonous and wasn't conducive to listening over long periods. At least that's my opinion. And so working on that music was kind of an object lesson of what not to do for creating music for games. And I'm not criticizing the game arts people at all. They did a great thing, and it was a very popular game. I just have a different approach to making music for the games. It's
a fine line between monotonous and atmospheric. There's such a line between wearing the player out or fatiguing them, I guess you could say, and boring them.
I hope I'm never boring. Well, I've thrown out a lot of music that has been boring. In fact, there are some pieces that I wouldn't even include in the album that are still sitting on my hard drive going, yeah, that's kind of boring. I'm not gonna let that see the light of day. I probably could spice it up and make it less boring, but no, I had more important things to do. I have 40 tracks to get ready for this album. Rather than come back and revisit old pieces that were boring, let's just work on fun stuff.
Well, let's take a minute to have a listen to. I'm gonna do a sample right here of the Clucky Bird video game music.
Well, there's a genre of music called chiptunes, and it's very much 8-bit music inspired by video games of the 80s and 90s. And the Clucky Bird game is in the Taco Nova part of the game. There's a coin-operated video game there, and I'm pretty sure that's where the Clucky Bird game is. And it's just basically a copy of Flappy Birds, I think. It's been a while since I've seen that. And I wanted something that, if you've played Flappy Birds, you'd know that dying is very frequent in that game. But I wanted something high energy to kind of keep you going, make you keep wanting to try to succeed further than you went before. I took my knowledge of the chiptunes genre, and I was able to use a library that I didn't get to use in very many other places of the game. I have a series of instruments from the Arturia, I think is the name of the company, Arturia collection. They have something that I wanted when I was a kid, and that was the synclavier synth. When I was younger, it was $30,000 American, and that's, I don't know, $100,000 today. So I would never be able to have that instrument, but they had the library, and I finally got a chance to fulfill a childhood dream of making music for the synclavier. And so almost all of the tracks in the Clucky Bird sequence are done on the synclavier. There's a couple of different things. I used electronic snare and kick from a different library, but most of the other pieces in there are from the synclavier collection.
Just curious, as somebody who really adores the Arturia library, are you using them like for synths? Like I know they have an amazing Jupiter and DX7 and Prophet and things like that.
Yeah, I have everything that they made. There's a couple of pieces in the game that use the DX7 horns, and
Right.
there's a few places in the game that use instruments from like the Oberheim and the Juno.
Yeah.
And I also am a big fan of the ARP 2600. When I was
Yes.
back in my school age, I got exposed to the ARP 2600 very early on, and I was smitten. I just fell in love with synth music because I sat there and watched a guy twirl the knobs, and then we got this synthetic violin section sound. And I went, oh, yeah. Jerry Goldsmith is great, but I'm going to have fun with this. And I actually put together my own synth kit, which was from a company called Paia, P-A-I-A. They sold do-it-yourself synthesizer modules that you could solder your own modules together and make a synthesizer that kind of looked like the Moog that Wendy Carlos used for Switched on Bach. I fulfilled a wish to emulate the ARP 2600 with my own piece of music, and unfortunately that I never got it working well enough to use as a performing, but it was really good as a learning lesson in soldering and putting together synth patches, and just an amazing experience putting that together.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, the 2600 is one of my favorites too. It's just blankets of sound. It's just gorgeous. It's almost learning how to contain it in a sense when you're playing that thing, and to just get just the right amount out of it, because it's just constantly giving you walls of sound.
And I would love to sit down and create my own patches for it, but there's so much out there that's already been done that I can draw from. That
right.
Someday I'll probably sit down and learn how to create patches for it. But in the meantime, there's a lot.
It'll be the one day when you can't find what you need.
Yeah.
Well, that would be difficult because there's such a vast collection of VST instruments out there that I can usually find. In fact, one of the songs that I'm doing for this album, I'm going to be re-orchestrating with kazoo. And I found 3 different kazoo libraries, and I was auditioning them yesterday as I was preparing the orchestral piece. Now, in the game, when you are Ace Hardway and you're in the escape pod and you're weightless, the Blue Danube music plays from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Well, I am going to reorchestrate that with kazoo. I thought,
of course,
this will be much more fun than a standard orchestra. And I might even because this is also in the game. It wouldn't be a Guys from Andromeda game without the theme from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Thus spake Zarathustra. So that's in the game, and I'm going to do something silly with that too. I'll probably use chiptunes type instruments for that to kind of make fun of the seriousness of that.
I love that it was 3 times easier to find kazoo library.
That's true. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Well, I just want to talk, let's all take a second to listen to the Andromacon Rave, because this song, it's you've got a whole convention floor, right? There's a big reveal when this song's going on, and the Facebox gaming console is being introduced. It's kind of funny. My son came up when I was listening to this, and he said, "Hey, have you heard of the new Steam box?" And I said, "What?" Because I was deep into thinking about Facebox, and I thought, are you talking about the game music? But no, he said there's this new Steam box you can buy that's like a computer from Steam. It's a whole thing, but the timing was beautiful. But anyways, so how did you achieve, like, this is going to be epic energy? Because gosh darn it, if it doesn't build on itself.
I have been to many game developer conventions and E3 expos and been on the floor of conventions where music is just coming from everywhere, and the music is colliding with each other. And often you'll see people with badges walking around with a sound meter trying to make sure that they aren't violating the safety thresholds of sound loudness. Going to a convention like that, you hear all this music from different places. A lot of it's very high energy. And I wanted to create that feeling, having been to many of these game conventions, because this is a game convention in the game. And so I wanted electronica. I wanted the European electronica style. So this requires a little bit of background. Space Quest 4, if you played the game with a Sound Blaster card or an AdLib card, and you're in the part of the game where you're in the ruined part of the city, and there are zombie monsters that are roaming the streets, and there's even a little scene where there's the Energizer Bunny. It's that part of the game, if you're familiar with that, with Space Quest 4. I wanted to recreate the sound of what's called a water bell. A water bell is a glass, like a great big glass pitcher, and it's on a rope, and you fill it with water, and then you strike it with a soft mallet, and then you tip it as it rings, and it gets this bending bell sound as it rings out, and the volume of water that's in it kind of shifts around, and I wanted to create that. I was able to do that on the MT32, but recreating that on the Sound Blaster and AdLib was very, very difficult. But I found something that worked. Well, years later, Trolls, Plemart, and his good friend Frederick were talking about how that particular sound, the bell sound on the AdLib card, scared the bejesus out of them. And they were afraid to play that part of the game because that bell, they ended up nicknaming it the Hellish Bell. But that bell would play as kind of an ominous sign that you were in a very dangerous area. And I wanted that sound in the AndromedaCon rave music piece. So as you listen to the music and the song starts building out and you hear the bell and it bends down, that's the sample from the AdLib Hellish Bell in Space Quest 4. Ooh. So now you have something for trivia night that nobody else knows.
That's fun. Yeah.
That is.
I wanted the feeling of nonstop energy that continues to loop. The song opens with a child speaking greetings from the children of Earth. Well, if you know your geeky space history, that is from an album that was attached to the both Voyager spacecraft probes that went into deep space. It's a gold record, and on one side is the sounds of Earth, and on the other side is symbols that would show anybody who would pick it up would know where it came from. So it was Carl Sagan who inspired this idea to put together the Sounds of Earth album. And the very first, in fact, it has greetings from the children of Earth in several different languages. And I wanted that to be in the opening of this song. Also on that record is a song called Johnny Be Good. You find, in the game, you'll find this Sounds of Earth record made of gold in the Scraps garage. And there's a puzzle that goes along with it, and I won't give it away because it's a pretty cool puzzle. But if you turn on the record player, you'll hear a song that sounds an awful lot like Johnny Be Good. I've changed the melody, and I've made a couple changes to the sequence of music, but this is how we paid tribute to some of the NASA lore in the game.
Oh, that makes sense. I like that. I think how did your workflow evolve? Has anything? I mean, it has been a bit of a longer development cycle. Have you stayed true, like the same route that you started with, or have you brought on new equipment?
Well, that's a great question. The answer is yes. I started out with generic, I can't remember the brand name, a generic orchestra library that cost me $100 or something. That's how I got started putting this music together. And then as I asked other musicians what kind of libraries they used, I found there was a consensus around the orchestra collection from East West, Sounds Online, and it's used by a lot of professional musicians, and I went ahead and paid a lot of money for that, and even upgraded it to the platinum level of the library. And it was really great for many things that an orchestra needs to do, but there are some things that it just couldn't do. I couldn't get good articulation of violins out of that, and I really needed it for parts of this soundtrack. And so I went on a hunt again and I asked a friend who actually does music for Hollywood for television what library he uses, and he said, I use the library from Vienna Symphony. And I went, oh, that's expensive. So I saved up my money. I actually used my bonus check from one of the places I was working, and I bought that. And I ended up using that almost exclusively for all the orchestra parts. And there are a couple of places like the timpani and violin runs or flute runs that the East-West Library still does quite well. But most of the music now, many years later after having started it back in 2013, has been reorchestrated using the Vienna Symphony Library. And now they've even upgraded, so I need to spend more money.
Well, you've said before writing music's a lot like writing code. That's kind of like, to me, I've always thought that's why your work, it feels emotional, but it also at the same time feels really structured. One
thing that I feel compelled to do when writing music is because of the level of detail that modern digital audio workstations afford you, you can go in and edit every single note, its velocity, its length, where sometimes you want it to occur before the beat or after the beat, just microseconds, so it sounds more human. And so there's a lot of attention to detail. In fact, the opening theme from the game, which you have for this podcast, I went in every single note, with every single track, with every single instrument that's in there, and I customized the velocity, the length, the duration of every single note in that, and that kind of level of detail is what's required for people who have to write code. They have to think about the big picture, but drill down to the finest granular points of what a certain command is going to do in their coding. I have a glancing familiarity with coding. Like I said, I wrote games in BASIC back in the 80s. And I've tried to get back into it occasionally here and there, but I always end up going back to music. But yeah, because the tools are so powerful today, I can get down to the granular level and just edit the dickens out of this stuff.
When you're looking at these just vast libraries of every stringed instrument we've ever come up with, do you ever have moments where you slightly miss the limitations of the MT32 days?
Absolutely. It was one of those things where we could just create the music and make sure the volumes were good, and it kept time, and you're done. And we could create a soundtrack in a month and a half. Typically for Sierra's games, it was like a 3-month period because we were working on several games at once. This project would have taken me years, even if there had not been other situations that caused the game to be put on hold for a little while. Yeah, I'm grateful that there were pauses and I was even a little concerned that the game might not have ended up seeing the light of day. But I'm grateful that it did take longer, and it gave me a chance to get the right kinds of libraries, the right kind of digital workstation, and to learn a whole new craft of the way to create music.
Very cool. Are you still using Cubase?
Yeah, I've been tempted to...
For your DAW?
Yes. I've been tempted to look at Logic because it's a lot cheaper and there's a lot of support for it. And Aubrey Hodges is a spokesperson for Logic, another Sierra composer.
Nice, I'll join them there. Yeah.
But
love Aubrey.
I bought Cubase version 6 at the beginning of this project, and I just paid to upgrade to version 15 just this week. So I've been paying for Cubase every other year to stay on top of the technology that the company offers. And there's a lot of sunk cost in this, and I've learned the tool. And it's a very, very powerful tool. So I kind of feel like I got to stick with it.
Yeah, I would for the hotkeys alone. Just having to learn a whole new set of shortcut keys is like, ugh, I wouldn't. That's why I'm sticking with the one I'm in. Like starting all the way over again sounds so daunting.
I don't want to do that, so I'm sticking with Cubase.
Good call. Does it kind of feel like a closing a loop with the two guys that started in 1991? Is this like a homecoming?
Oh, it really is. I felt it was a homecoming to get back together with Mark and Scott, and then also to meet Chris Pope and the others who were contributing to the project. It did really feel like we were reviving a fun part of the history of adventure games, and it's a rare chance to be able to come back and create a spiritual successor decades later of a classic series of games. It really did feel like the old days back in the early 90s of working with these guys again, because the humor was still the same, the sensibilities of the kind of puzzles, that death had to be part of it as well. It just felt so familiar, but we got to update it. It got to be super high res now and 4K and all that. So it did bring back a lot of emotions that I miss from the early 90s.
Which kind of already answers my next question. I mean, what does releasing this soundtrack mean to you personally? Now that the game is in early access and people are playing it, what's your feeling inside about it? Does it represent the full personality of SpaceVenture to you?
It does represent a chapter of my life that's been quite long. And it is nice to finally come to the end of this project. But I will miss it, because working on SpaceVenture has been part of my routine for the last decade. And, plugging all the music into Unity and doing all the sound design and everything has consumed my leisure time more than most other things. And it's going to come to an end here pretty soon. And I will really miss it. And hopefully I have a chance to work on something like this again.
I believe that.
What's your favorite musical memory from SpaceVenture?
Ooh, good one.
There's a character in the game called iMom. It's a personal digital assistant, or as we like to say, a personal dissatisfied assistant, who always telling you not to slouch and to make sure your hair is combed and you're dressed right. It's a PDA, a smartphone, but kind of nags at you. I won't have any spoilers about what kind of part that character plays in the game, but it's pretty important. Both Mark and Chris said that they wanted a piece of music that was very reminiscent of Leave It to Beaver, and I went, what kind of music is that? Because I haven't seen Leave It to Beaver in forever. So I went back to the show and watched a bunch of episodes, and I listened to the kind of music that they used when June Cleaver was on the screen and the world was innocent and in black and white. And I came up with a theme for iMom that just I hadn't had to write a piece of music like that ever in my career. So it gave me a chance to once again stretch my legs musically. And so as you meet iMom for the first time in Act 1, you'll hear the piece of music that Mark and Chris Pope inspired me to write.
My notes from this song. Wow, I want to sit at the kitchen table and eat cookies and milk after school.
Well, then mission accomplished. That's exactly what I wanted to
right.
feel like.
Super wholesome, yeah.
I listened to it the first time before reading the notes that you had given me, just so I can get an impression of the songs on my own. And then on the second time I read through the notes, and it was just the most satisfying, because it's kind of like how I used to play Sierra games. I would get the game, I would read the box, I would crack open and read all the manuals, and then I'd play the game, and then I'd go back and read all the manuals again, and it was just such a satisfying process.
Boy, that's something. Sierra Games did that. They really they really inspired people to just dig deep and experience everything to the fullest. And hopefully we recreated some of that with the SpaceVenture game.
Well, if people are hearing the soundtrack for the first time, but outside the context of the game, just like without any of that, just listening to it as music, what do you hope that they take from it?
Oh, man, I don't think I've ever thought about that kind of question. I hope that they feel like adventure gaming is still a viable source of entertainment, and that the kind of work, because adventure games are very, very involved, and there's a lot of different things that go into them. It's an epic endeavor to undertake. I would love for adventure games to regain their popularity. I mean, we certainly see that with some developers that are out there that I'm sure our listeners would know about. Dave Gilbert, I think, is one that comes to mind. That adventure games are still engaging and still worth buying and experiencing. And even though it's a story that has a beginning and an end, that many people replayed the Sierra games over and over again because it was an experience that they just had fond memories of. Even today, like we mentioned before, that people will go back and play The Colonel's Bequest because it was something they remember playing as a 7-year-old with their father. And so I just hope that this revives a genre of electronic entertainment that has always had a special place in my heart, and I'm sure yours as well.
Oh, it certainly has. So can I get a couple shout outs from you? Tell me, what all are you working on? Where do you want us to go? What are your friends working on? What are you doing after school? Do you want some Melton cookies? Give me the whole rundown.
All right. Well, if you go to kenallenmusic.com, and you'll be able to audition about 20 of the tracks, or maybe more than that are in the game. There's over 40, like I mentioned, and it covers all different kinds of genre music. But you'll be able to audition the music there and listen to it. And then there's a link that says, click here if you want to be notified when the album is released. and it'll take you to a Google form, and you fill it out and give me your contact information. And as soon as I have an announcement to make about the game, I'll send it out to the people who've signed up on that mailing list. And at some point, when we're finished mastering it, and I'll give credit where credit is due on that particular front in a moment. But as soon as it's done being balanced and mastered, and uploaded to all the different services that will sell this album, if you buy it from a link on my site, you'll get exclusive content that nobody else would get if they bought it on iTunes or on Apple, on Amazon Music. The person who's doing an incredible amount of work to master this is John Paul.
Shout out to JP.
Yeah, he's an amazing guy. I met him for the first time in person at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, and we got to recreate the song from Space Quest 1 that it plays when you see the ZZ Top looking characters. We put lyrics to that, and Jackie sang it, and we were up on the stage, and John Paul played the guitar solo that's in that piece. And so I was really thrilled to work with him to perform this thing live. And then we talked about his skill set involves mastering and balancing music ready for publication. And I reached out to him. I said, "Hey, I'd like to work with you. You've done good work. I've heard great things about your process, and can we work together on this? Would you be the mastering guru for this game?" And he says, "Absolutely." So he has been just an amazing partner in getting this ready, and he works very fast too. I'm so impressed.
Yeah. That's his whole shtick. It's very good, and it's very fast.
Yeah, he really knows his stuff. And in fact, I went through every track today, and I had some notes, because one of the things you have to do when you're mastering music, and I don't envy the people who have to figure this out, is you have to master the music in such a way that it sounds good from headphones, on stereo speakers, on your car stereo, on your iPhone, through earbuds. You have to make the music sound good for all those different outlets. For someone like him to be able to do that, it's just, it blows me away. And it's something that I understood that Prince did, that he would play his music on all different kinds. He'd play it in his car just to see what his fans would hear when they heard his music. So he's been a delight to work with, and he brings a skill set that I can't even imagine accomplishing on my own. A shout out to John Paul. Thank you so much, if you're listening, for participating and being my partner in this.
Well, that's an awful lot. Well, thank you, Ken, for keeping adventure game music relevant and just bloody good. I don't think I can say enough. I mean, I always will think afterwards, I should have said more, but I just really appreciate what you've done for my ears and my brain for my whole life, Ken. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I do want to mention one more thing before we start going to sign off, and that is when I first started working on the SpaceVenture game, the character Cluck Yeager, I really hadn't understood what his part was in the game yet. And so I wrote a piece for him, his theme, and it was very reminiscent of Pirates of the Caribbean. Played that for Mark Crow, and he says, "Yeah, he's not that kind of character. He's this kind of character." So I went back and wrote a whole new theme from scratch, both of which are available on the website. And will be available in the album. And there are many, many pieces that never made it into the game that were rejected, not because they were bad, but because it just didn't fit the scene. Those will be included on the album as well. So,
please do, and stay tuned at the end of the episode for a bonus full track as well. So now I want to give a proper shout out to all the people who keep this podcast running smoothly and consistently, our Patreon supporters, especially those in the official True Believer roll call: Mark Fillion, Brian Manown, Mick Council, Tim Ellis, Gareth, Chapman Carruthers, Christopher, and Yanis. You're all in the True Believer tier, which means you've backed the show hard enough that we get to keep making episodes, diving into rabbit holes, and staying part of this lovely adventure game community. Thank you for powering the podcast. And since we've been having some email issues, if you want to reach out to us or say hi, here are a few of the slightly more reliable places to find us. Twitter, I'm at CGG Podcast. Paul is at The Phantom Fellows. We're also on Blue Sky, and you can always drop us a line at the site, thephantomfellows.com. If you want to send actual words, the show email is mail@cggpodcast.com. If you want to support the show and keep the podcast rolling, you can join Patreon at patreon.com/Classic Gamers Guild. Come hang out with the community. We're on Facebook as a page and a group, the Classic Gamers Guild. We're also on Instagram and YouTube too.
Do not. Man, it's so hard when you think about it. I'm usually just talking. Don't do a murder. There we go.
And I didn't finish answering your question during a podcast about just walking around, but because you mentioned there would be this music video, and we didn't actually cover that, and I'm sorry we didn't go there. But I am going to, after I finish writing the lyrics and recording the melody, I am going to take a selfie stick and go to as many different places as I can. I want to go to famous landmarks in the United States and be singing that song, just walking around in front of all these different places in the country that people will find recognizable. So I'll be walking around the entire country. Hopefully my wife won't object to the money it'll take to do that. But that's my plan for the music video.